Greetings, everyone. I'm Richard Dolan. This is my wife, Tracy.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to Intelligent Disclosure. This is our 6th episode, and I've got a lot I want to talk to you about, but Tracy's got a few words before we jump in, so why don't you take it?
Okay. For those of you who've been here before, and for those of you who haven't, welcome to the show. We just want to introduce Lori and Michael, who are helping to moderate the chat. You'll see them in there as Pursuing X, and so look for messages from them. And we see there's a lot of regulars here, so hi to everybody who's been showing up every week. We are going to jump right in. We have Richard wants to talk about something, a serious topic tonight. So the only thing we want to ask everyone is in the chat, this is very controversial. So no matter where we go with this, let's realize that we're having a discussion here. We don't want people to get super heated in there and get fighting, anything like that. This is about a discussion. We're here because we want to hear what Richard has to say about this. So we're just asking everyone to keep it cool tonight. And if you want, let's have some questions that are relevant to what Richard's going to talk about. And then at the end, we'll see if we can get to some other ones in the other areas. But I think, is there anything else we want to
No, I think that's perfect.
That's it. Okay, so I will be back, but I'm going to leave it to Richard. Okay. All right.
Great. Wonderful. And thanks. That was great. Hi, everybody. It's an interesting thing doing this live stream because there's been a lot of commentary on what I'm about to talk with you about. And a lot of it's been very, very interesting and thought-provoking. Doing it live stream means how this is how this is going to be. So there's always a bit of wondering, how will this turn out? So I want to talk about the banning, let's say the deplatforming of Alex Jones and InfoWars. And already I was looking in some of the chat earlier, and I can see people have very different opinions on this. So I just want to give my opinion. I consider this very important for our society for many, many reasons. So within a 12-hour period of time, just yesterday and the day before, Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all roughly within 12 hours deplatformed Alex Jones' program, InfoWars. I think Facebook had 4 pages of his. They were gone. YouTube, he had 2.5 million subscribers, banned. Facebook permanently bans him. And, it's all the same reasons given. They're all really vague because actually nothing explicit that I have been able to find has been cited. Facebook, I think most famously yesterday talked about hate speech and that his comments violated their hate speech guidelines, their community guidelines. I want to get to that in just a moment. The thing about Jones, I've listened to him on and off for many years. I've listened to a lot of people on and off many years. They're all very different. He's labeled conspiracy theorist. That's usually the first thing that you see about him. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Secondly, he's labeled right-wing. Thirdly, he's labeled conservative. You hear all of these things. And then, of course, you get the criticism. So people have been on his case over Sandy Hook. People have been on his case over 9/11, if you can believe it. It's been 17 years, as if we cannot have a controversial opinion or a differing opinion on 9/11. Are you kidding me? People have gotten on his case over his statements on the Parkland shooting in Florida. They've gotten on his case over his statements relating to Pizzagate. You can disagree with him on all of these things, including 9/11, if you wish. That's fine. People have different opinions on Alex Jones. Doesn't matter. The key to defending free speech is defending speech that you don't agree with. That is the whole point. There was a famous quotation, was actually attributed to Voltaire, one of my favorite writers. It wasn't Voltaire, but it should have been Voltaire. It was a writer named Evelyn Beatrice Hall, and she wrote for Voltaire a century later, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." And I think that this is a very important thing for us to remember in our society. But I want to talk about hate speech. This is something I'm pretty sure I've written about. I've certainly talked a lot about it. And if someone needs reminding, I think it's important to remind you that hate speech is not a legitimate designation in the United States. It has no legal status in the United States. This is not true of other nations where hate speech is legislated, so that therefore in other nations, if you make statements that the government considers hate speech, you could go to prison. You could go to jail, you could pay fines and so forth, and people have done that. In the United States, this is not a legitimate legal designation. I would argue, furthermore, that hate speech is not a legitimate concept, at least not something that is appropriate to create legislation about. And again, this has to do with the idea of free speech. Now, deliberately inciting people to harm others is one thing, but that's not what people call hate speech, really, because frankly, very few people do that. Very few people will say, I want you to cause deliberate harm to so-and-so or such and such a group of people. Like, you very seldom hear that. And this is not what people talk about when they refer to hate speech. No, the media and, let us say, the establishment call something that they consider offensive, typically, to be hate speech, something that they consider insulting to be hate speech. Essentially, like when somebody hurts your feelings, I have to say that is not hate speech. That is not hate speech. But whatever you think about hate speech, again, in the United States, it's important to point out that hate speech does not have a legal designation. Someone who's been very closely associated with InfoWars, Paul Joseph Watson, pointed out, I think really correctly, that Facebook, Google, and Apple, because Apple also took Alex Jones off their iTunes, are really acting as a kind of de facto US Supreme Court as private corporations. Now, there are people who will say they're private companies. They're allowed to do what they want. And it is true that private companies are not under the constitutional guarantees of free speech in the United States. But the United States also does have a very strong tradition of not stifling speech, whether in governmental or non-governmental areas. And B, I would suggest, as many others have also said, that these particular forums, we're talking Facebook, YouTube, Apple's iTunes, they are dangerously close to monopoly status in many important respects, with tremendous influence over our society. So by deplatforming people, what we're seeing is the new censorship, and that's why I've titled this talk, The New Censorship. In ages past, government censorship essentially involved making it illegal for you to say certain things. If you were to say certain things that a government considered disruptive or hateful in that society, you could go to jail, you could be killed, you could pay fines, and so forth. And your writings would be banned and eliminated from publications. We all know about this. That's the traditional censorship. The new censorship is 21st century style censorship, and it really involves deplatforming. It involves muzzling or ghosting people, turning them into non-entities to the extent possible. And that's the way it is done now. And let me just say this. If you like or don't like Alex Jones, again, I think is irrelevant. I would ask you to consider, go back in time 55 to 60 years ago, and consider another man whose words were, at the time, by the establishment, considered hateful, divisive, violent. And that man was named Martin Luther King Jr. And it's very easy for us to forget. Back in 1960, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. was plagued incessantly by criticisms, wrong criticisms, I want to add, that his speeches caused violence, that his speeches were divisive. Well, in a sense, you might say they were divisive because they offended the ruling establishment at the time, which didn't like what he had to say. And they made statements at this time to say they didn't have the phrase hate speech, but if they had that phrase, they would have used it, because that was essentially what he was criticized for many, many years, until the moment he was assassinated in 1968. So I would ask you, what would have happened to Dr. King if we had Facebook and the corporate control over media establishment that existed in 1965 or 1960, And would he have been deplatformed and defunded, or excuse me, deplatformed and ghosted because his words were considered a form of hate speech? And it's really worth asking. Again, the point about deplatforming and censoring is you have to ask yourself, are you really going to go so far as to want someone who you disagree with not to be allowed to voice their opinion? It's fine to criticize Alex Jones. It's fine to criticize InfoWars. As I said, I've listened to him on and off for many years, just like I've read and listened to CNN for many years, just like I've listened to the great writer Michel Chossudovsky in Montreal, who has the website globalresearch.ca, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Just like I've read and listened to Noam Chomsky for many years, and countless other writers and speakers for years and years. Does that mean that I have to agree with all of them all the time? Well, clearly I don't. Not all of them, and not all the time. Do I have moments when listening to any one of these people that I think, oh, brother, you've really missed this one? Absolutely. But I will have to say that in all the time that I've heard Jones, I have never heard anything that I personally consider as hate speech as would be reasonably defined. Criticizing Islam, which is one of the big things that he has done, has often been cited. And this is what, in fact, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook stated as one of the key reasons is criticisms of Muslims. But in fact, it's criticizing Islam as a belief system. And I would simply suggest to you that criticizing Islam or any religion, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or any other belief system that you can think of, must be fair game in our world. It must be fair game to critique a belief system. Islam isn't a race. Islam isn't a group of people. Islam is a belief structure. And as such, it is as much fair game for free thinkers to critique as anything else. And indeed, free thinkers have pointed out for centuries dangerous patterns of religious thought. Was Thomas Paine a purveyor of hate speech? Seriously, think about this. Over 2 centuries ago, Thomas Paine wrote a book called The Age of Reason, which I would highly recommend you read sometime. It's a brilliant work of free thinking that anyone could benefit from. And Paine didn't really talk about Islam so much as Christianity, but it doesn't matter. It's a structure of thought, and as such is fair game. Facebook is funny. Facebook talks about community guidelines, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Community. Facebook is not a community. And even if Facebook did seek to promote a kinder, gentler forum where only good thoughts and not bad thoughts are expressed, it's very obvious that these thoughts are really quite biased. It's been pointed out, and I have not seen a refutation of this, that Antifa still has their page. Louis Farrakhan still has his. And I mean, frankly, as repugnant as Antifa is to me personally, I am really quite repugnant. They have the right to express their opinions. Absolutely they do. And in fact, it's better to dialogue in a forum than fight it out on the streets. That, again, is what debate and argument is all about. So I think what we're dealing with also, I will suggest, is a lot more than some moralizing pontification going on by a corporation that's pretending to be your mom to tell you what you're allowed to think and what you're not allowed to think and say and not allowed to say. Although, yes, that is true. That is part of what's happening. But I think we also have to consider and recognize that this has been a coordinated corporate effort. There is no way on earth, it is not possible for Facebook, Google, and Apple simultaneously, without some kind of coordination, to deplatform one person at the same time. I do not believe it, and I don't think any reasonable person would believe that. I think now Twitter, as we all know, is not yet on board. There's a lot of pressure from certain political quarters to get Twitter also to deplatform Alex Jones and InfoWars, but it hasn't yet happened. But I think it's fair surmise to say that Facebook, Apple, and Google worked in concert really to prevent him from going on the other platforms to talk about the censorship on any of the other individual platforms. So it was a coordinated slam, really, against him. Let me say something to my friends on the left. I would say think long and hard before applauding this draconian move. This is a very, very bad precedent. Someone described it as more than a slippery slope and more like a cliff, and I think that's quite accurate. You know, once upon a time, more than half a century ago, the left supported free speech. Many of us grew up. I grew up associating the crazy hippie left with freedom of expression, which, okay, yes, that was kind of true. The old guard, the conservative right-wing Christians were considered the killjoys in society. And, you know, we would hear things like, lighten up, it's about freedom of expression. Well, the left is now clearly siding with mega corporations to make decisions based on the most opaque reasonings that deeply affect the course of free speech in our society. Jordan Peterson, I think many times, has brilliantly pointed out, correctly pointed out, why we need freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, as he has said, is more than just a right. It is the very foundation of a free and healthy society. And think about it. You can't improve yourself without free and total access to the truth. And you can't get to the truth without a lot of people providing insight and input. Do you really honestly think that you, right now at this point in your life, have full access to all of truth and all of knowledge? No, certainly not. So what we require in this society is a full and free and fearless ability to discuss ideas with each other. And by the way, it really helps if we do this in a way that doesn't, demonize other people individually. I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to critique other people's ideas. That's how societies become better ultimately. And I think, as Peterson, I think, rightly pointed out, it's how we become better. I fully agree with that. So, and it's a funny thing. We have become so polarized in this world. It's depressing, I think, right? It's depressing to see this. This is not how a healthy society should be, where not only do people demonize politicians they don't like, that's happened forever, but now we're at the point where people demonize followers of politicians they don't like. And that's a scary position to be in. And this is how societies can unravel. We really don't want to go down this road. We must get to a point where we recognize that people who disagree with us are not bad people because they believe things that you don't believe in. That's a really dangerous idea. I don't know about you, but I have known many people in my life, good people, that have held ideas that I absolutely have disagreed with and have thought were wrong and sometimes thought were really bad ideas. But it doesn't mean that I thereby would condemn such people. The best way to deal with that is by dialogue and reasoned dialogue, and hopefully without the invective and emotion and the condemnations that often go along with that. But what I was going to say is that it's funny now, because I have had serious problems over the past few years watching the political left transform itself from what was once a bastion of classical liberalism and the foundation and defense of freedom of speech and expression to this moralizing nanny state tendency to regulate what is proper and improper to say in public. As watching this, I've become more and more critical of them. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that I have to choose between being on the left and on the right. I consider these, in many, many ways, false dichotomies. I like to know what is left and what is right in this world today, to be perfectly honest. And I think the real question that we need to be asking ourselves is, are we allowed and are we promoting or not promoting freedom of expression in our world. That, to me, is the foundation of what constitutes a healthy society. And so-called hate speech, ill-defined. There's no, again, legal definition for hate speech in the United States. And corporations like Facebook, which incidentally are, very friendly, beyond friendly, really, with the establishment, or at least elements of the establishment. Do they have the right? Does YouTube have the right? Does Google have the right? Does Apple have the right to make unilateral decisions that affect the broad base of our society? And I think this is going to work against them. This is the new censorship. Again, this is not the old censorship in practice. This is the new censorship. This is 21st century style of censorship. I think increasingly we're going to see this. I think it's clear that these corporations have gone too far this time. There's a large, obvious backlash against what's happened. And I think, it's odd to think this, but they are turning Alex Jones into a martyr for free speech. And I don't think they want to go down that road. But they are absolutely doing this by a utterly opaquely defined draconian action that affects millions of people. So I think this is a very, very dangerous thing that has been done. I think the decision to muzzle him should not be made like this. It's clear political pressure. One of the other things that Paul Joseph Watson pointed out that I thought was apropos was his comment about CNN, which, you can really see the irony here. CNN, for the longest time, has really tried to take Alex Jones out of the picture. They've gone after him again and again and again. And they've aired calls to deplatform him multiple times. And here's CNN now promoting itself really as the bastion of free speech and free media in their war with the President Trump. And yet they are gleeful, clearly gleeful. And it's arguable that it was a lot of their pressure that helped to push Facebook, YouTube, and Apple and Spotify into this realm now where they've deplatformed really the major critic of big centralized statism as it exists in our world. Again, like him or not like him, whether he's right or not right is really not relevant. That's not what's relevant. What's relevant is, does somebody have the right to be out there and to be talking, particularly when they have lots of followers. And those followers exist for a reason, because there's a lot of people out there, obviously, clearly, who believe in him, who subscribe to him. Again, freedom of speech doesn't count if it's only opinions you agree with that are protected, right? The whole point of freedom of speech is that there are opinions that you disagree with that are also protected. That's what it means by protecting minority opinions. And that's what true diversity is all about, diversity of opinion. Before we open this up to some Q&A and before I bring Tracy back, I just want to point out to you that the very phrase conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theory was created in the year 1967 by the Central Intelligence Agency, that is by the CIA. This is true. There's a CIA dispatch known as 1035-960 that was written in 1967. All right, and this has been known about now for the last several years, and I think it's gotten a little bit more notoriety in the last 2 or 3 years. I've talked about it before. But essentially in 1967, the CIA created the label conspiracy theorist to attack anyone who challenged official narratives, and specifically, in the case back then, to go after people who were challenging the official narrative on the JFK assassination, which in 1967 was very recent. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963. It had not been much before that. And already by 1966, 67, there were severe critics of the official narrative of the assassination of the president. Not everybody believed the Warren Commission. And indeed, historical analysis of the Warren Commission shows those suspicions to have been very spot on and apropos, absolutely. But in April of 1967, the CIA wrote a dispatch which coined the term conspiracy theories. And what they did is they recommended methods to discredit these theories. Right? The dispatch was labeled under the word psych, which was short for psychological operations or disinfo. And it was also marked for the CIA's clandestine services unit. That's their covert ops. And really what it did is it provided advice on how to manipulate or how to utilize mainstream media to employ what they called explicitly propaganda assets to refute the attacks of the critics. And this would be done through book reviews and other mainstream avenues to basically turn the critics of the JFK assassination into wide-eyed religious type conspiracy theorists. So I'm only bringing it up for this reason, that the very phrase conspiracy theorist is a CIA creation. And, you know, we've now been living with that phrase for so long. And so many people, particularly establishment people, toss that phrase out as a way to smear individuals that they want to discredit. They do it again and again. People who research, as I do, UFOs are often labeled as conspiracy theorists. And keep in mind that this is a smear. And the last thing that I want to say before we open this up a little bit, I've wondered quite recently if the allegations of fake news were going to supersede hate speech as the new form of censorship on the web. Let me explain a little bit better here. Fake news has really become a thing in our society over the last couple of years. And what we've seen in the last year or so, particularly, is increasing amounts of legislation, sporadically, but still growing in momentum around the world, to legislate against dissemination of what governments consider fake news. So in other words, most notoriously earlier this year in the nation of Malaysia, on the other side of the world from me, but nonetheless, they banned dissemination of fake news and made it illegal. So that if you were found guilty of disseminating fake news, you would pay a fine, or you conceivably could go to jail. That's a heavy price to pay for disseminating information that the government considers false. And I thought, you know, we're seeing a great deal of Western media establishment attacks against so-called fake news. We see it on Facebook, we see it on YouTube, we see it elsewhere. And there is definitely increasingly movements afoot to de-platform individuals deemed guilty of spreading fake news. And that's a really super dangerous road to go down. That affects anyone not considered establishment. That takes us right back to really pre-internet era, where only officially sanctioned opinions are allowed. So my theory earlier this year was that fake news would become the new favorite toy of the establishment, surpassing hate speech as a way to deplatform and censor. But I think I was premature in that thought. And clearly hate speech still has a tremendous amount of power as a concept by elites, by the establishment, to deplatform and to ghost and to shadow ban and all these other words, to take people out that they consider dangerous or that they disagree with. Again, this is a dangerous, dangerous time. It's very disturbing. Anyone who believes in freedom of expression should find this disturbing. And again, it's irrelevant, whatever you think about Alex Jones. Until someone starts openly advocating for violence in some capacity, they should be allowed to promote their opinions to the best of their ability. And if you don't like them, you have the ability to disagree with them publicly or tune them out. That's always an option too. What constitutes a healthy society is open dialogue, not restriction of dialogue. And again, because when you restrict dialogues in this manner, you give your opponents power, and you also give them, incidentally, moral justification. you give them moral strength against you, and you really only delegitimize yourself that much further. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about this right now. I have no idea what people are saying right now, but we can bring it, we can open it up,
Okay.
and let's talk about it. You want to come back in, my dear?
You're gonna have to move that so I can see.
Let's, we'll take this down, and we're going to full screen ourselves so we can see what we've got going on here. So, welcome back.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Thank the chat. Thanks for all the comments. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. And thank you for the super chat queue. It is actually a salt lamp. It's not rose quartz, although we do have some in the house.
Oh, that back there? Yeah, it's a salt lamp.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so with everything that you were just talking about, of course, some concerned people, and they may not have heard the whole thing, of course, people come in at different times, but you know, I think people are agreeing with what you're saying, but there are lots of people who are saying, what about when it comes to inciting violence? Like, how do you sort of...
Right. Well, I don't think, you know, there's an old argument about freedom of speech. You don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater, unless there really is a fire, I suppose. But you don't have the right to deliberately incite violence and mayhem. And that's simply every society having the right to protect itself against overt acts like that. So clearly, I think any reasonable person would agree with this. If there's an individual who is intentionally promoting openly, you know, particularly acts of violence, then yes, we have the right to defend ourselves against such individuals. I am not aware in any instance that Alex Jones has done this. Now, if he has, someone can prove me wrong, and that's fine. But the examples that I have come across strike me as not legitimate and not really worthy of the discussion. So, no, I wouldn't say that. I think the criticisms have come over people being offended. People who are Muslim don't sometimes like his characterization of Islam. That's fair. That's fair. If you don't like the characterization, your right is to disagree, and your right is to counter with truth. That's what it's all about. You don't have the right to tell someone they don't have the right to express their opinion in a public forum. That goes beyond what is right. So clearly, inciting violence, no, I don't think anyone would condone that, or anyone should condone that.
I just I had something, but the chat is moving so fast, it's hard to catch. It was something about, I saw someone writing there about what do we think about people, you know, the parents of Sandy Hook getting harassed. Mm-hmm. Can you comment on that?
Well, here's the thing. You know, Sandy Hook is one of these events that I think a lot of people are really terrified to go in and investigate. The problem with all of these shootings, and I'm not saying Sandy did or didn't happen. I'm not offering an opinion on the Sandy Hook shooting. So please, I'm not going to allow myself to be characterized by that at this time. But what I will say is that Alex Jones has a right, as much as anybody in this world has a right, to question the narrative of Sandy Hook. All right? If you're not allowed to question the narrative of a mass shooting, then we're in serious trouble. And the parents who have instituted a defamation suit against him, essentially, I'm not really buying it. You don't have the right not to have your feelings hurt, which is essentially what he's been saying, is that it's been a government hoax. And from what I'm understanding, he's walked back a little bit from his initial position on this, so whatever. But the fact is, no, you don't have the right to stop someone from giving their opinion simply because he hurts your feelings. That's not what this is about. He could be totally wrong. He could be completely wrong what he says about it. Again, that's not the point. Someone said that the Sandy Hook parents were having to force to move because of Alex Jones. Well, sorry, I'm not going to buy that either. No one forces you to do anything but you. You make your decisions. And it's just not fair to blame someone else's opinions on actions that you make or that other people do. That's not a fair criticism. It's the same criticism that people had against Martin Luther King Jr. more than half a century ago, incidentally. All right. the same exact types of criticisms were leveled against him. That is, he's purveying hate, he's divisive, he's leaving violence in his wake. My God, as a kid, I heard that. And those were canards, that's a fancy word for lies, said about him. They were used to discredit him. Right? And you cannot make someone responsible for actions of crazy people who may interpret what they say in one way or another. That's not a fair thing to do to anybody. You have to criticize people for what they do, and you can critique their ideas in terms of what they say. That's what freedom's about. That's what free speech is about. And, restricting that in any way is one of the most dangerous things that a society can do to itself.
Okay. I'm going to jump here. Do you think the deep state is controlling fake news?
Well, that's a good question. In a way, it can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and I'm not sure how the person writing it wants to interpret this. What I would say is that for a very long time, this has been very well documented through things like Operation Mockingbird. We know, this is not a matter of speculation, all right? This is a matter of historical fact, that the CIA for years and decades and generations manipulated mainstream media through paid people within the media to spin and control and censor news. And we know that this happened. Mockingbird was outed generations ago in the 1970s, partly through the Church Committee hearings on the U.S. intelligence community, and partly by the journalism of Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame. And what Mockingbird was, it was a model by which the CIA had their assets within Time and CBS News and AP and Reuters and every other network you could imagine, and had in the New York Times, famously in the Washington Post, that they had their people who would spin the news on their behalf. So in that sense, absolutely the deep state literally created fake news to disseminate. And they created more fake news than any other institution outside of maybe the old Soviet Union and Mao's China that I can think of. Right? They created fake stories whenever they wanted to do regime change of governments back in the 1950s and 60s, and we know this, against Cuba, against Iran, against Guatemala, and more. So that's literally fake news. Now, Mockingbird was exposed in the mid-1970s, and the CIA immediately, in their lawyerly, legalistic way, said, well, we no longer have such paid relationships with American journalists for the purpose of influencing domestic opinion, however they said it. Well, they don't need to have paid relationships. Journalists in the U.S. media know that a relationship with the CIA is a career maker. They're jumping over each other to have relationships with the CIA. And not just the CIA anymore, but the Pentagon, military, has deep influence over U.S. media. Deep influence. They don't want, opinions that are actually dangerous. And they know through what media is, you have to have the illusion of choice. So you have to have a left and a right that are within acceptable parameters, acceptable to them. And again, I've mentioned the work of Noam Chomsky throughout my whole life many, many, many times. And Chomsky, I think, back in the 70s, pioneered in a lot of ways these concepts in a way that I think works for intellectuals, which is that you control the left and you control the right. And by doing that, you ensure a safe, that is for the elites, continuation of the paradigms that you want to continue. So that question, does the deep state control fake news? Short answer, yes, they sure do.
I'm just, there's a lot. Does Richard think that the media platforms colluded against Alex Jones together? You kind of talked about that.
I did talk about that, and I think the answer is they have to have. I think the most logical, reasonable supposition has to be, it must be, that they acted in concert. There's no way that this happened by coincidence, or that, Apple does something, or Facebook does something, and then a couple of hours later, the people at Google say, oh my goodness, look what Apple just did. Look what Facebook just did. We need to do this too. Corporations don't act swiftly like that, just without getting all their legal ducks in a row. All right. They plan this out long in advance. All right. So you're not going to convince me unless you have actual proof, and I don't think you're going to find it, that they did act in collusion. And that is my governing assumption. And I think that's the most reasonable governing assumption. And frankly, I think most people looking at this, including, by the way, the Washington Post, which wrote a not totally reprehensible article on this yesterday. I was shocked, frankly, that the WAPO was at least as moderate as they were. They did make a lot of egregious errors, and but they did really show a lot of skepticism over the manner in which Facebook particularly came to their decision, and really using the word opaque particularly to describe the process. And I think in a very non-opinion centered article, pointed out that there would be a lot of individuals who would see this as a slippery slope and really a dangerous road to go down. Or I'm paraphrasing, but the Washington Post did provide that sense. And so I thought that was quite interesting.
Here's another one. Is there any way you think it's possible to remove corporations' influence on media and government?
Yeah, through laws. Through laws. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying, oh, let's just go in and have the members of Congress, fight for truth and justice and freedom of opinion. But look, I mean, the mechanism has to be there. And I've said many, many times, I mean, I believe in a lot of ways the system is broken. The wheels spin and there's no traction. And we know this, actually. I mean, there have been study after study done academically to show that the system, the congressional system in the US, and I'm sure in most other countries, works for the benefit of those elites at the very top of the socioeconomic pile, and that they do not work for poor people. And I think that's absolutely true. And but it's not just that. The system works in a very specific way because it has been co-opted by corporations. But having said that, it has been co-opted by corporations, quite frankly, since the moment that the bullet went through the head of Abraham Lincoln in 1865, if you want to go back that far. All right, so more than 150 years. Nevertheless, I will maintain, it must be possible to regain control on behalf of the people from corporate power. One way to do it has got to be to minimize, as much as humanly possible, the amount of money that goes into influence elections and politicians. And I mean, I realize that this is probably a fool's errand, but there has got to be a way. There have got to be smart people on the inside who understand this. And I'm sure that they're offering suggestions that are probably, some of them are very good. So it is necessary, like what we don't want, what no one wants is an actual revolution with people in the streets fighting and killing each other. What you don't want is a revolution where you kill or, people in government over this. I don't feel that that's a positive path to go down. I think that's dangerous. I think what we need is to reaffirm the very best form of a political system that I am aware has ever been devised, ever, in the history of humankind, and that is the representative democratic system that we have in the United States and in other countries as well. And there are all kinds of variations. They have parliamentary systems. We've got congressional systems. You've got strong presidents. You've got weak presidents or weak prime ministers, whatever. There are variations on a theme. But what we must maintain is an adherence and a belief in this idea that the people are sovereign and that we must find a way to regain control over our representative systems. And I don't pretend that I've got all the answers on how to do that, but I am never going to believe that that's impossible. I'm never going to believe that. Maybe that's an act of will or an act of faith, but I don't care. You're never going to convince me we can't do it. And I believe it should be possible and it must be possible.
Okay. Are you all right if we switch over to ufology?
Yeah.
Do you think there's any risk for ufology? I think you talked about that a little bit as well. So let's use that as a segue.
Good. I think actually this is an appropriate way to talk about it, because I don't want to get too off track here. But if you don't know much about me, if you're new to me, I've written a lot of books on UFOs. It's a funny thing, when I've got into this all these years ago, I've had to deal with know-nothing people. I mean, really, truly know-nothing people who think, oh, UFOs, you're on the fringe, you're crazy, you're not reputable, whatever. All right. I've spent 25 years now trying to educate people on the legitimacy of that particular subject. And I know I'm right. And I'll talk till I'm blue in the face to anyone who wants to hear me about why that's a valid subject and why UFOs are a really serious and important subject in this world. All right. So having said that, look, the UFO subject has had 70 years of censorship, even to this day, by the way. Everyone likes to talk about how the New York Times and the Washington Post back last December broke the ice and talked about UFOs without ridiculing it. That's true. They did talk about it. They didn't ridicule, but that doesn't mean that the ice is fully broken either. The fact is that for more than 70 years now, UFOs have been the third rail of intellectual discourse in established society. That goes for media, that goes for politics, that goes for academia, world of science, whatever. The true structures of power, you don't go in and talk about them because they will destroy your career. And that is a form of censorship. I've talked about this again and again. Now, the UFO subject has gone sort of below the radar because you can't get the New York Times to talk about it in a legitimate way. You can't get Time Magazine to talk about it in a legitimate way. You can't get any of the dinosaur media that, who really cares about these guys anymore? But you can't get them to talk about UFOs in a legitimate way by and large. And so the UFO culture has, in a sense, benefited in a way from growing below the radar by having some very good researchers over the years who have added to our store of knowledge about it. And, I have wondered many times, what we are seeing is a kind of reaction against the world of the web. And that does potentially include a reaction against UFO research. And think about how this whole thing is developed. In the world of the 1970s and the world of the 1980s, there was no internet. There were establishment newspapers and magazines. I was a young guy back in the 80s, and I thought, just like everyone else, that, oh yes, if I just read Time Magazine and U.S. News and World Report and whatever else was out there, that I was getting the news. I believed that. I thought I was a real sharp character when I learned about The Nation and the New York Review of Books. And it's not that they don't have value, okay, but I had this idea that this was the summit of freedom of expression. And then came the internet in the 90s, and then in the 21st century. And then all of us learned that, oh, wow, there's actually a lot more of a range of opinions that people can talk about intelligently and in depth than could ever have been imagined in the old stream, lamestream media. And so what that meant was that the culture of the web could not ever have been foreseen by those people who are our elites and who think that they're our betters. There's no way they could have predicted this, in my opinion. All right. But it doesn't mean that they have not been trying ever since to get control over that genie that's gotten out of the bottle and to use it for their own benefit. And they absolutely are. So now they are using the web to track you, to basically minority report you. That is, they'll know you better than you will know yourself in many, many ways. And they can do it. They've got the algorithms. They know what websites you go to. They know all about your emails. They know about your text messaging. And they can create a psychological profile of you and of me and of everyone that will, well, what can they do with it? They can do anything with it, really. So that's one weapon that they're using. Another weapon is, GPS tracking you 24/7. Another weapon is, listen to Edward Snowden talk about this in his one of his Vimeo interviews. It's fascinating. I think he did advice where he talks about breaking apart a typical smartphone and showing just how invasive these devices are and how difficult they are to shut down, right? So this is how the elites are coming back at us. And now they're coming back at us ideologically and in the form of control. By creating, I firmly believe, by fostering a culture, not creating, but by fostering, by promoting a culture, and they're very effective at this, that marginalizes opinions that they don't want out there. Opinions that criticize statism, opinions that criticize globalism and globalization. And don't think that that's not the case. That is the case. Globalization, yes, it is a fact of life. The fact that I'm able to talk to you right now via live YouTube stream could not happen without globalization, right? So the real question, though, that I think thinking people have about globalization is that it's not that is globalization happening. It's like, what form is globalization going to take? Is it going to take a form that resembles freedom in some way, or a form that resembles authoritarianism and maybe even totalitarianism or fascism in some way? And that's really the debate. And folks like Alex Jones, incidentally, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about your freedom to have your opinion. I see nothing wrong with that. But back to UFOs, there is a danger, absolutely a danger, that a whole host of opinions that are deemed antithetical to state interests are now subject to deplatforming. And that could include me. That could include anyone else in the UFO field. That could certainly include people who talk about 9/11 research. I mean, absolutely. Even though it's been 17 years and, you really have to wonder, is anything going to happen out of 9/11 research now? We have an entire generation of people growing up in a post 9/11 world. It's reprehensible that we should be where we are today, but here we are. But the fact is that there are 9/11 researchers, there are UFO researchers, there are other researchers who, right or wrong, criticize elements of the current version of statism as it exists. And I'm just asking you, do they have a right to say what they want to say? And the answer, I think, should be yes. And to argue, again, that, as some people do, that, well, Facebook and YouTube are private corporations, they have the right to do what they want. That is specious reasoning. Don't buy it. Don't accept it. These are monopolies that have close relationships with the structures of power, and probably, really arguably, a Mockingbird type of relationship. Because really all Mockingbird was, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, was the deep state, the government, manipulating public opinion through major media. That's all it was. And when you look at Google, Apple, Facebook, and the others, it's really the same type of relationship. The details are different. That's really not that important. The fundamentals are the same. So UFO research, yes, absolutely can be at risk. And look, UFO research, in my view, has been marginalized in many ways. I firmly believe, and I'm not going to get into names, so don't ask me to, but that there have been people in the UFO field who have intentionally gone in to sow dissension and cause problems as like a COINTELPRO type of operation. And if you don't know about COINTELPRO, go look that one up. So, agent provocateurs, essentially. So I think there have been attempts to derail the study of UFOs, and deplatforming it is yet another option, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll go into something in a second, but I just want to say we want to thank you guys for being here. We want to thank you for all your amazing comments and the chat. If you want to support Richard and you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and you can sign up for notifications, and you'll know every time we're going live and whenever a new video of Richard drops. And if you're liking this, if you're enjoying this discussion and you find this valuable and you like Richard's work, if you wouldn't mind liking this video, that really helps him out. So, and thank you, Michael. We thank you for your super chat. Thank you.
And thanks for saying that. And I just want to say, because we're going to wrap up soon, I don't want to go a lot longer than an hour tonight, but we're going to try to get down a regular time schedule.
Yeah.
So we've been bouncing around a little bit. And really what we're trying to do is find out what's what's the best time to get viewers while we do this live? Of course, after we go live, they're always available on YouTube anyway. So in a sense, but I mean, the live format, it's important for both of us to be able to do it. And there's a certain feel about doing a live stream chat with you that I really like this. I like being able to go live, and it's not manicured, it's not rehearsed, and there's mistakes, and there's I'll stumble over myself, but so what? That's reality. And I think that there's a real value in that, and I hope that you like that as well. So
very cool.
Right.
And okay, so let's just pop back into here, and then we'll start to wrap it up.
Great.
So a lot of people have been asking about the moon, but I don't know if we're going to go into that one tonight. Maybe we can save that. There's been a few people.
Let's
Earth
get
question,
that next
moon
time.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time, sure.
We'll get that another time. People are curious, if you've ever been approached by anyone to sort of tone it down, or if you've been approached by, if you think the FBI or CIA has ever followed your career. Has anything ever happened? Any intimidation?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I'll deal with it here. So I've never had anything explicit. All right, I've never had anything explicit where I've been threatened, or my family or my children were threatened, or anything like that. So I'll just put that right out there. That has not happened to me. And sometimes I listen a little bit bemused when I hear other people who I think who claim that they've been threatened by government agents, and I think your work doesn't really strike me as all that interesting, but nevertheless, there you go. But it has not happened to me. Now, I have gone through a phase in the early 2000s where, particularly after I started talking openly about 9/11, because keep in mind, I'm a New Yorker. My dad worked at the World Trade Center. My dad was a retired cop who was a fire safety director at the World Trade Center and happened to have that day off. I was very involved in 9/11 research for quite a while. In 03, 04, I talked publicly. I think that I was the first UFO researcher, or at least person who was known as a UFO researcher, to talk openly about 9/11. And when that happened, I found myself getting stopped at every single airport I ever flew out of. My name was flagged for several years. And I would get stopped often. If I had to make a connection, I would get stopped at both connections. And they would ultimately let me fly. So I wasn't quite on a no-fly list. I was on a let's jerk his chain list, is how I call it. I used to have a number of odd but unprovable but odd white vans in front of my house for several years. And I could talk more detail about that sometime. And I used to have major internet issues in the early 2000s. At one point, I had a Time Warner guy come into my house to look at my cable connection. He came back after climbing the telephone pole, and exact words were, "I don't know what you're into, buddy, but you've got a lot of weird things going on with that connection." I said, "Well, look at my wall." And it was a wall of UFO conspiracy books. And he said, "Oh, well, I don't know if that's the case." But he made a few phone calls, and all he was able to do was to just clear up my connection. I never really was able to get a full answer as to what was going on. Nowadays, that was back in 03, 04. It was considered a big deal. Now I think we can all assume that because there are all kinds of comprehensive data scarfing programs that exist, that I have no doubt that everything that I say that is deemed of interest is being stored somewhere. The thing about what I try to do is, I don't ever want to get to a point where that is going to stop me or intimidate me. And I feel that I've been fortunate in that I've been able to walk a path that, I want to keep reasoned. I want to keep a path in which I'm speaking in a civil manner to fellow citizens of the world in a way that invites reasoned discourse and not invective and not fighting. I mean, one of the things about Alex Jones is, it's true that his manner invites this. He gets histrionic, he gets crazy, he pounds his fist and he screams, and people roll their eyes, and I would roll my eyes at that. Yeah. It's like, come on, stop, enough. Stop with the antics. For whatever reason, that's his way, that's what he likes to do. Mm-hmm. And it's been argued, incidentally, just back to Jones here, that he intentionally provoked Facebook, thinking he was bigger than they were, bigger than the internet, and now here's his comeuppance. That could be true. But again, I would just say that's irrelevant as well. That's irrelevant. All right, until you're doing something that's genuinely illegal, I don't see any reason why you should be deplatformed. So there you go.
Okay. I would just like to bring up, some people are asking about any sightings that any new sightings that have come about that you're interested in, but I think there hasn't really been anything lately that I think that we've got into. So I have something else I'd like to go to,
well,
unless you want to go
I'll just say very quickly, there are very interesting sightings being reported every single week. They're on the National UFO Reporting Center. They're on the MUFON database. In terms of very last week or two, I don't know. I had an interview on this, that is now on this channel, on my YouTube channel here, with Ryan Stacy of MUFON Canada. I would encourage you to check that out. And Ryan talked about some fascinating, recent, very bizarre events that occurred in, throughout Canada, particularly in one area in Ontario, Canada. So and that's current. So there's a lot that's going on.
There was also that article about Vancouver, right, being a hot spot for UFOs.
That's right. That was a recent study that comes out every year by Chris Rutkowski, who I've known Chris for quite a while as well. He's a Canadian researcher out in Manitoba who does these studies. And Vancouver is definitely, at least according to those statistics, lots of activity. When I have interviewed a number of people in Vancouver for bizarre things that have happened in terms of sightings and more, and there's definitely something there.
A huge amount of the unusual things that happened in my life were in Vancouver.
In Vancouver. We'll have to talk about that sometime, by the way.
Sometime. So something that's come up in here that I think we should talk about, why isn't the Tic Tac video getting more attention? And what do you think of Luis Elizondo saying we're going to be having a whole new conversation about UFOs this time next year? Do you really think TTSA and MUFON are going to have a big year with new information?
Yeah, TTSA, I mean, everyone's got an opinion on them, and my opinions are not always the same one week to the next about it. So I'll just say that. I don't know Luis Elizondo personally, so I'm not going to speculate on his state of mind when he says certain things. All of these people, let's just put Tom DeLonge out of it for a minute, and we can see him as the talking head who's now been taken out of that role of talking head, primarily, I think, because of the Joe Rogan interview, which was bad move by Tom DeLonge. And I think people in TTSA realized that, and they just yanked him like the hook on stage. So now you're left with the spooks. So you've got Hal Puthoff, who I know Hal Puthoff personally. You've got Elizondo, and you've got Semivan, and these other guys. So what I'm going to say, and I've said this before, and I said this just a couple of weeks ago on this program, Intelligent Disclosure, about Hal Puthoff. And no one's going to tell me otherwise. And no one's going to make me change my mind until I get proven something. I've known Hal Puthoff for a long time. I've had heart-to-heart talks with him. We've talked about the UFO phenomenon together at a deep level. In my view, this is a man who takes the phenomenon deeply seriously, and it matters to him. All right? And I respect that. And I also understand, like, he's had a life in the world of science and the intelligence world. And I am just not going to condemn a person because they have worked in an intelligence community. That's ridiculous. I can condemn the institutions all I want, and I do. CIA doesn't go down that path. So as far as what TTSA is about, everyone loves to speculate. And I think some of the speculation is informed and a lot of it is not informed. And basically, I don't want to speculate at all. The thing that interests me about TTSA is, what do they release? That's it. They release videos, they release information, they release a new program. Puthoff's got the most interesting thing going on in TTSA right now, in my view, that he's got his own company, Earth Tech. He wants your crash retrievals. He wants your alien tech. He wants to study it. Well, sure, I have no doubt he would love to make money off of it. Who wouldn't? But the fact is that they're talking openly about this sort of a thing. And how is that not interesting? How is that not interesting? So I'm look, my attitude about TTSA is I'm waiting for them to release more information. If they want to release more information, good. If they don't release more information, then they're going to be like a little balloon that just pops. And that's the end of them. That's the way it is in this world. You produce or you get out of the game.
Okay, I'm going to switch topics a little bit. We're going to stay in the same realm, but someone asked, how was your experience with the Ancient Aliens crew when you're on the show? Show seems reputable, but you never know. So what are your thoughts on it?
I'll talk about Ancient Aliens. I've done many shoots with them. So they're produced by Prometheus Productions is the name of the company. So what that means, Ancient Aliens is simply a brand name that is on the channel, the History Channel. And the History Channel hires a company, is Prometheus in this case, to create this show. And so what they do is they've got all these producers, and they know this is a goose that lays golden eggs. Ancient Aliens is a huge money maker for them, obviously. I just did an interview with the very brilliant Gordon White for the Richard Dolan show, and that will be on YouTube. And Gordon, I think, characterized Ancient Aliens very well, which was that it's this perfect format that allows a kind of almost infinite variety of things to be discussed, and it just keeps going. I think that's right. That doesn't mean everything on Ancient Aliens is true. God almighty. They really go off the deep end sometimes. And sometimes they talk about things that are really interesting. You know, I mean, they're speculating. It's a TV show, and they're driven by profit, so they're going to try to put things out there. My experience with the producers, typical TV producers in many ways, with a little bit of a twist. So most TV producers are smart people. Most of them know really nothing about UFOs, like nothing. I've had time and again experience with these producers, and their job is they're given this UFO assignment, and then they'll meet someone like myself, and I'll sit down, and I've seen it happen many times. Their mind will be blown by what I have to say to them. And I can see the look in their eyes. Like I'm sitting, cameras on me, producers asking me questions. I do my little riff, and they're like,
well, they got their expert, right?
They got someone who, I mean, I don't hold back with them. And they use what they use, and that's the end of it. So now with Ancient Aliens, some of these producers, because the show's been going so long now, are really quite knowledgeable about UFOs. So I met with the producer earlier this year. I cannot remember her name, but like she'd read my books. She knew the
Frankie. Does that sound right, Frankie?
Yes, I think that was her name.
Yeah, you were really impressed.
She was very good to work with. And there are other producers on that franchise who, generally speaking, the way it is they will email me. They'll ask me to do such and such an episode. They'll say, this is what we're going to try to talk about. Are you able to talk about this? And I'll say yes or no. And that's basically it. And then you go in for a shoot, you sit there for a day, and then they fly you home. It's very simple. By the way, they don't pay. They don't pay you. You get no residuals. So when you think all these people are making a fortune on Ancient Aliens, well, I'd like to meet these people. Like maybe Giorgio is making good money. I have really no idea. But I can tell you, they fly you in, they put you in a hotel, and they'll give you maybe like $200 or a couple $100. Sometimes it's like really nothing. People are just dying to get on the show. That's really what it's about. And you roll your eyes, you go, okay, I'll get myself on TV. And that's what they do. That's exactly how it is. But generally, TV producers are professional individuals to work with, by and large. And they're out, they're trying to do their job. They just want to get it done, make it look good, sound good.
I think it's been a really good platform for ufology and all of the surrounding topics, though, because, there really wasn't anything for a long time. So the show, even though it's considered entertainment and it's up to us, to do our due diligence on everything, it's really been, speaking for myself and for people I know, it's kind of been a really great thing to open up the dialogues and give us more food for thought, don't you think?
I would agree. I think, there's a lot to criticize about that show. And incidentally, I don't want to get too much into the UFO discussion here in this program, because I feel like it's taking away from what I wanted to get into related to free speech. But I think it's significant in the sense that you know, we need as a society to be able to talk about all subjects that are important to society. And the fact is that the UFO subject is important to society. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This shit is expensive. Do you think that all the missing money that has been reported over years now, like that none of it has to do with the UFO subject? Think again. All right. This is a phenomenon that involves a lot of money for R&D, a lot of money for replication. And, you know, we're all but now at the point of having confirmation that this is a significantly expensive program in terms of studying the tech. More and more information has been coming out, and a lot of it is good information. How much money would it cost to build or to try to build a replica of a flying saucer? I mean, ask yourself. I don't think it's cheap. At least the research into over years and years could not have been cheap. The ability to create secrecy in presumably underground bases where you'd want to test this, or remote destinations. This is not free, and yet none of it's discussed in our society. So it's de facto a black budget type of operation, and you have the right to know about that. We have the right to know about that. And we have the right to talk about it openly in public. Otherwise, we're giving up our rights as free citizens. So to wrap up the show with Ancient Aliens, which I got a little off track here, but look, Ancient Aliens it's corporate, it's money-making, it's easy to criticize, and many people have done so, and often with justice. But not everything in there is nonsense. And it has served a function of opening up the public to this reality. And honestly, it has been an agent of cultural change, like it or not. It's been an agent of cultural
Absolutely.
change.
It helps to bridge, I think, open up the dialogues to people who weren't open before. And it gives all of us more talking points. It really opens it up.
Yeah.
So,
but I don't want to go much more into the UFO thing, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who may watch this show, and they're not all UFO people. Like, they don't care. But they also should know, like, don't send UFOs into the ghetto either. All right. And it's been in a ghetto. And by the way, if you're new to this subject, and if you found this video simply because you're interested in the InfoWars controversy, that's good. But don't think for an instant that other subjects that you may want to laugh at are therefore, worthy of ridicule. That's wrong. I learned through long, hard years of study, like archival research, detailed analysis of revealed U.S. government documents, which I have talked about over and over again throughout my whole adult life, that this phenomenon is real and is worthy of our time and our consideration. In fact, it's worthy of the best minds that are out there. And there's not enough people working on that subject. It needs more, not fewer people working on it, talking about it openly. And so for that reason, it is part of the free speech debate. And, the person who asked, like, is the UFO subject in danger of being deplatformed or censored? The answer is yes, of course. Of course it can happen. Of course it can happen. We're living in a world now where we need to remind ourselves of the word totalitarianism. And maybe this will be a good point for me to wrap this up. And I know we're going to be done after an hour, but there you go.
Yeah.
But
it's going just how it should. So.
Totalitarianism, think about what that word means. It means total control by the state over the lives of its citizens. That's why it's totalitarian. All right. Now, in the case of the governments of the 1930s, when the phrase was coined, the Nazis and the Stalin, the communists in the Soviet Union, and some people referred to Mussolini in Italy as a totalitarian. And really, you're looking in the 30s at Hitler and Stalin, and then Mao in China for sure. And they were true totalitarians in the sense they sought total state control over the lives of the citizens in any way that was meaningful. And, here in the Western world, in the good old USA and up in Canada, where Tracy's folks are from, and in the UK, and all the other places that call themselves the free world, They're like back then, totalitarian equals bad. People should have freedom to live their life. And that's true. You should have the freedom to live your life as you see fit, as long as you're not truly harming someone else. Hurting their feelings doesn't count. You're allowed to hurt someone else's feelings, just saying. You're not allowed to hurt them physically or harm them financially for undue cause. Okay. Anyway, that was then. This is now. Now, totalitarianism. What does that mean? It means total state control over. Total state knowledge, first of all. Total state knowledge. You know, back after 9/11, if you remember back in George W. Bush, they rolled out a program that they quickly renamed. It was called TIA, Total Information Awareness, back in 2002. I remember that. And people were like, what? Total information awareness? That sounded very Orwellian, which of course it was Orwellian. It was totalitarianism. And the Bush administration walked back from it and they just renamed it something else. And of course they just went ahead and did it. Bush people did it. Obama people did it. Trump people do it. All right. That's independent of party. The government wants to know everything you do to the maximum extent possible. And it's not just the US, all these governments. So total information is part of totalitarianism. Total intimidation is also part of totalitarianism. You know? And that comes through total information, because not only do they want to know everything you write in your emails, everything you message in your Facebook messaging, everything that you send on your phone, everything, every place you go to on your GPS, all right? Things that you say through your voice recorder on your phone. Like, the technology is there and the capabilities are there. And, you know, there's no excuse for not knowing about this since Edward Snowden. All right, you have no excuse for not knowing that this stuff happens. All right, so that's, and then on top of that, you've got every street corner in the society now with cameras monitoring you, and now with facial recognition technology, like you have nowhere to hide. All right, voice recognition tech, you got nowhere to hide. Mm-hmm. Someone else commenting on this, it's everywhere. So try to run, doesn't matter. So if someone in the government or in the intelligence community wants to track you, they're going to track you. And that means intimidation. That means, you know, the next time that there's a protest, they can triangulate your eyes and your nose and they'll know who you are. Why do you think the Antifa people, who are many of them violent thugs, cover their faces? They don't want to be triangulated and have their faces identified in the ubiquitous facial recognition program. But it's not just violent thugs that want to hide. It's good people who may have legitimate protests. Sometimes they're intimidated because they may be afraid that the state will monitor them. And it's not simply that the government's going to come after you, but your company that you work for increasingly will know through pressure. And you may lose your job, for example. Like, that's actually, I think, the real fear that more and more people have. And this is getting back to the new censorship. The new censorship isn't state-directed solely. It's corporate-directed. It's the state working through corporations. And it's corporations, in many ways, controlling the state. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on understanding that dynamic. Are the corporations in charge of the state? Does the state manage society through its relationship with corporations? Well, you can argue that out. But essentially, the new censorship is, a lot of it is corporate. And we're not really, as a society, dealing with this in a way that we really need to, all right? Because corporate censorship is every bit as powerful, if not more powerful, than state censorship. And it's the effect on society that we need to be concerned about. So anyway, it's all about the growing totalitarianism, and the creation of new generations of young people who, some of them are very politically switched on, whether rightly or wrongly, in my opinion. But a lot of the young people are, eating toxic food, receiving toxic entertainment, toxic games, and they're never, a lot of the folks, and they grow up with 9/11 as a fact that's not to be questioned. And, the culture changing. No expectation of privacy for a lot of young people anymore. It astonishes me to see people willingly giving up their privacy. It's different for me and for us. We are public people. We put ourselves out there in the public, and I've kind of given up on the idea that I'll ever have a true private life. We try, and we really do work for that. But for most people, you are entitled to privacy. You're entitled to it, and the world that we are now developing, this interconnectivity that we're all having, it's a scary place to go. And this is the last thing I'm going to say here. Like I said, we need to take back our forms of government around the world. We do need to, and we need to reinstitute the true trust in other people through freedom of expression and freedom of privacy. These are things that we really need to hold near and dear to ourselves, because we ignore them at our peril. It can always get worse. You think things are bad now, they can always get worse. They can get better and they can get worse. Societies crumble all the time throughout human history. And that can happen to ours, and that won't be fun. You don't want to see that happen. You don't want to see the fabric of your society getting ripped further apart than it already is. You want to mend it. And so what I would say to people on the left and right, or however they want to describe themselves, is look, the people on the other side are not your enemy. All right? They have families. They have loved ones. And they, in their way, believe that they want the world to be a better place. You may disagree with them, and that's fine. So you know what you do? You talk to them, and don't insult them. Don't call them libtards on the one side or fascists on the other. Don't do that. Don't call them socialists or communists or deplorables on the other, whatever you want to call them. Don't do that. We're human beings. I mean, isn't it true? How many times in your life have you caught yourself prejudging someone before you get to talk to them? And then comes the moment where you talk with them and you realize what a jerk you were in judging them the way you did. That's happened to me too many times, I'm embarrassed to say. I would meet someone initially, form an immediate judgment, opinion about them, a negative opinion, right? And then at some point later comes an opportunity to talk to them, to listen to them. And I realized, wow, how wrong I was, how totally wrong I was. And I still may not agree with certain things that they do, but again, so what? It's okay to have disagreements with people. It doesn't mean that they're the Satan 2.0. We need to just step back from the histrionic demonization of other people. We've got to do that. And we have to defend our opponents' right to speak freely. Otherwise, we do not improve ourselves, and we do not improve our society. We make our society worse. That's it. I'm out.
Okay.
No more.
Richard out. Okay. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you so much for tuning into this. For the moment, we're going to stick with Tuesdays, and we're going to see how that goes. So you can expect us next Tuesday. I believe it's 8, but we'll announce that. Thank you for all the great questions and discussion and chats, and it stayed, pretty diplomatic, and I think we all loved what you said at the end there. So maybe some topics that we'll get into next time that I saw, we might touch on remote viewing, the moon, cryptocurrency. I saw people were asking about that, and
sure.
That's something that we haven't gone into, and we will keep a running track of a lot of the topics. But basically, if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and like it. And if you'd like to get notifications, there's a bell. You can sign up for notifications there. You'll know when Richard's going live and when anything new drops. We have 2 websites. There's Richard Dolan Press. You can go and see all of the other books published that Richard's published from his other authors. And Richard Dolan members, which is
and my books too, are there.
and his books, of course. But they all know that.
Right.
But yeah, Richard Dolan members as well. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah, the richarddolanmembers.com is a site that Tracy and I created earlier this year. It's a new site, and it's been growing every single week. We add new content all the time. It's been really where a lot of our effort is going. Mm-hmm. If you want to follow what I'm up to and what we are up to, because Tracy's got a presence there as well, go to Richard Dolan Members. Just check it out. There's a lot there. I've been very, very pleased. We're pleased to get a lot of the feedback from members who tell us that it's informative and it's enjoyable. And we want it to be an enjoyable experience. And what I'm finding is that we're creating a really great community there. Yeah. Just as I think there's, I want to create a community here to the extent that it's a genuine community. I think like we can do this, right? We can do this. There's a lot of darkness around us, and you could focus on it and you get depressed about it if you don't see any other option. But there are other options, and it starts with us, with each of us. A, the refusal to get depressed about it. B, the belief in our ability to reason. The belief in the ability of other people to hear reason. And there may be a bad day and you have a big argument with someone, but you come back, because there's always an opportunity for us to reach each other. And I think that that there are people in this society who can be models for others. And it's not just public people like us. It's people watching this video. Mm-hmm. Everyone can be a model. Everyone can. You can be a model to your family, to your social network, to your friends. And you thereby make the world a better place too.
Gotta agree with that. Seek to understand, right?
Yeah, that's right.
To be understood. So with that, I just want to answer something about the Richard Dolan member site. Somebody was asking if you can sign up with PayPal. Yes, it is PayPal, but you can also use PayPal to process through your credit card. So you don't have to have PayPal. Right. We have a calendar there. It's under the events tab. Everyone can access that, and we try to keep that very up to date with what's going on. We have a conference in Missouri coming up in the middle of September. That is available for live stream. It's on transhumanism. Richard will be speaking at that. So
I'm looking forward to that.
You don't even have to go. You can live stream the whole conference, and we think it will be a really fascinating discussion. There's a MUFON cruise coming up in March of 2019.
Dude, I've never done a cruise in my whole life.
Really?
No, never. Not once.
I've done one little tiny weekend
Never
cruise.
done one.
And the friend that I went with was sick the whole time. We barely even saw the outdoors. So yeah, it'll be fun. It kind of be like both of our first time. So that's something we have coming up. And it's looking like we have Manchester, UK at the end of June. And so lots of cool things. But the calendar is where you can keep up with that. That Richard Dolan Members has free content, and it also has subscriber content. So we hope to see you all here next week. And thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, and we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the channel. With that, we hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we want to thank Michael and Lori. We could never do this without them for moderating the chat.
That's true.
Yep, and thank you to all of you for being here and for supporting Richard.
I want to thank everyone for coming out. It's been a good experience, and let's shine some light. Let's shine light in the best possible way. I think we can do it.
All right. With that, we'll say good night.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Okay. Good night.